here film beaches. And making a mistake, small word, actually combat a small word dealing with discrepancies. He rendered it. In some ways, I would be worse as a conventional word because you're constantly at risk. And emotions of anxiety would probably experience it very, very high, things like that. And Louis Bean comes home from this war, and he brings with him, ends up joining the Ku Klux Klan, and he brings with him this ideology of bring the war home. We're going to talk about what this ideology is, but he brings to the white power movement in the United States in the post-Vietnam era the tactics, techniques, and procedures from the U.S. military. So in many ways, he's singularly responsible for paramilitarizing the white power movement. Further, he's also responsible for a organizational and logistical change. And it's embodied by this idea of leaderless resistance. The idea was he had seen what the US government did in counterinsurgency operations, targeted the leadership. We had like a unit, it was like the Navy Special Forces Intelligence, but it was like a Phoenix project, or they called it Phoenix something, but it was basically like village elders that when you were cooperating with Vietcong or the NVA or the Army, they would get assassinated in the villages. So there were programs like that that were set up during this. So he knew if there's leaders in our movement, we'll target the leaders. So what we need is a leaderless movement that is decentralized. And the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing you he doesn't exist. You will see acts of white supremacy terrorism that is fed by this ideology, and you'll say, oh, that's one crazy guy. And you write it off. And that may or may not be true, but if you dig into it, and as Catherine Blue describes, as you dig into these, what you find actually a ton of connections. And some of these bigger right on. And certainly the ideologies that they are espousing comes from it. So there was a narrative of betrayal. We were betrayed in Vietnam. We could have stayed in Vietnam, we could have won, but they didn't let us fight the way we wanted to. Well, how? You've all heard it. You know what I'm talking about. The Carlo will say, I can solve the Al Qaeda problem. We'll just do Afghanistan. Whatever it's talk like. We'll turn Afghanistan into glass. Okay. All right. How many civilians are you going to get? And once those survivors come in, we're going to build mad and launch terror attacks after that. And, and you just go on and on like, okay, that's the Trump response. Is that America killed the out of insurgency? No. We're going to kill usually the war. Say it. You win by winning. And militarily, flag measure, and kill again. And then I got a bunch of civilians. Hey, you do something crazy. Pull that territory, provide security for them. And then you bring in these guys from the State Department called USAID. They bring in food to make sure all those people starve. You know, units come and kill you more. And they bring in clean water, and they show you all these little tricks set up clean water out in the areas. And then they help them build up an economy. And then they build up their own police force that's friendly to you. And the terrorists can't come back. Clear, hold, and build. It's all part of the military strategy. Right? So USAID, which we're about to get rid of, is critical to military strategy. Because you're in the military, do you want to stay around in the military provide governance forever? No. Marine Corps, how many is 12 weeks straight? 15 now for basic. And then you do specialized training after that. But the focus of that training is on how to kill. It is how to set territory, it is not to how to hold the territory and prevent terrorists from coming back in. Marines are all about this up tempo. Move. Always on the move. Attack. Get it. Go on to the next thing. Attack. Get on to the next thing. But if they're bogged down and they have to hold the territory, the surgeons will just melt away, retreat, and then come back in. You're going to be doing this over and over. The strategy of put her fully in the middle requires people to come in and provide social services, teach them how to do their own government, all of those kinds of things. That's long, that's boring, requires a whole different set of specializations. You don't want to do that. This is where a State Department and USAID program is critical to American national security. You think terrorist launching attacks on America is bad? USAID is really good for American national security because what it's doing is essentially saying those terrorists don't have that safe haven. So what happens when they have that safe haven? They build up people who use those resources to launch attacks against what they call foreign. So USAID is absolutely critical to American national security. We actually had really good action point operations. After the Tet offensive, they essentially expended themselves. The American public decided we had enough of them. We had a courts program, the U.S. State Department. They were not winning any battles. We could have stayed in Vietnam and left a residual force and probably profit, just as we could have stayed in Afghanistan. But were we willing to keep doing that, keep expending that blood and treasure? Politically, the American public was tough. They were we're getting out. We're leaving. We had it up to here. We're getting out. You lied to us. You told us they couldn't launch a national level attack. In 1968, 1969, they did. You lied to us. But the military was like, they expended this. Ho Chi Minh actually may have ordered the Tet offensive for the purpose of wiping out the Viet Cong. Why would we do that? The Viet Cong was ready to talk about South Vietnam being independent of North Vietnam. So he actually launched this massive attack for the purpose of getting them all wiped out against the Americans. They had a media about that. Media about that. Of the American public changing their perception. Media is very important. I've come to realize that media is super important. Like 6 months ago, everybody was complaining about the price of eggs. Eggs are higher price now, and nobody's complaining about the price of eggs. What was the difference? The entire media space is not talking about something. Your eggs are higher price now than you notice. It's not an issue, right? Because there's a media ecosystem backing one candidate versus another. And the Democrats are Democrats have their own meetings. It's just not. Oh, they're digital. So Louis Beam is saying, make a mistake. You betrayed us. You betrayed us by not letting us fight the war we wanted to fight. But a guy like Louis Beam, he's your term. How would he applaud that? What is that? Well, everything, probably what we would call ethnic cleansing. Probably what we might call genocide, yeah.
Isn't that was dude that like the general or like the Jalen led Pacific Theater? Like isn't that what he wanted to do? He was like, why don't we just nuke them?
MacArthur.
Yeah, yeah.
Truman was like,
So we just nuke them, man.
let's do the Chinese. Well, that was a Korean one. That was in the 1950s. Only like the Chinese. And Truman was like, that's cute. You're fine. Straight World War II there. He was very important. But he had to go on road and on. Well, let's just do Chinese. And then there would be constants. So he had this narrative of betrayal. Imagine you are coming home from the Vietnam War and American students are protesting and spitting on you. After you just got drafted into an army against, possibly against your will, but you didn't initially go, you got drafted in it. And instead of saying, hey, thank you for your service, you almost universally say, the response is, you're a baby. Now, some of this spitting stuff was exaggerated. A lot of that stuff didn't really happen. There were anti-protests. There were tons of anti-protests. College campuses. And that was one of the reasons why people said one of the key things was when Robert F. Kennedy not the son. The father was running for president or not assassinated. He was likely to win. He was saying, hey, you college kids, you're not getting drafted. You're getting your permits. You're not having to serve. You're not paying costs. Why are you supporting this? And there was a real sea change in how people felt about the war. So there was a narrative of betrayal. There was intentional clan recruitment of ex-soldiers so that they could get and diffuse those tactics, techniques, and procedures. So here's Louis Bing. He joins the military at 19. He's from a working class family. He joined for economic reasons. He didn't have money. Uh, One of the things that you hear these arguments and that they will resonate amongst the working class Americans. Say, I didn't go to college. Why should somebody get student loan forgiveness? I couldn't afford to go to college. I didn't have that opportunity. They signed on the dotted line to take those student loans. Why should they get forgiveness? Right? You can see where some of these arguments come from. And so he comes from a working class family. He joins for economic reasons. He becomes a helicopter gunner in Vietnam. He was racist way before Vietnam. We go back in his personal life. Like there was racism there already. He was very charismatic, and he starts this idea of leaderless resistance, as I previously mentioned. And he starts a Texas training. And this is something interesting. What the US government does is when you go home from being a soldier in the post-World War II era, got the GI Bill, and you've also got possible access to lower interest home loans or loans for land you might want to buy to start a business or some type of organization or something like this. And you use some of those government low interest loans to set up essentially what became paramilitary training camps for white supremacists. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about racial violence in the U.S. military. So the U.S. military integrated in 1948. That is relatively recent. That is a fair, and we take it for granted that the U.S. military is racially integrated. We take it for granted. Uh, that was obviously in the post-World War II environment. So let's think about what happened in World War II. You had segregated units in World War II, and one of the most famous segregated units was an African American unit, black unit known as the Red Tails. And they were a fighter pilot unit that was known for never losing an American bomb when they were protecting those units. It was an amazing success for them. And so that was just one of many. There were many units that were racially segregated. But that was one example that really points to and say, okay, these guys were some of the best fighter pilots, if not the best fighter pilots in World War II. Obviously, we should be racially integrated. That was going to run up to Southern culture, which was still under the system of Jim Crow. When I refer to Jim Crow, what am I referring to? Does anybody know? Mm-hmm. Tell me what they were.
Like, seven.
Yes. So, exactly. So you had a system of essentially legalized racial oppression in the American South, um, essentially from the end of the Civil War. Now, there was a radical Reconstruction period. As soon as that ended in the disputed election, the Hayes Utility in 1878, they essentially say the Southerners actually win the election. Some of their rights. So they say, you Republicans, you can have the presidency, but we want you to bring back the Reconstruction South. And when they did that, the moment they did that, you essentially instituted Jim Crow. Jim Crow was also many things, but essentially said, separate but equal. It created a racial hierarchical system. Black people couldn't use the same bathroom, black people couldn't use the same drinking fountains, couldn't have the same job, they were going to be distributed, and it was all legal. And it gets essentially enshrined into law at the level of the U.S. Supreme Court in a case called Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. And Plessy was a Creole in New Orleans, and the Creole made good money. They were like artisanal, like for example, he was like a shoemaker. He was like an artisanal shoemaker, like a really good pair of jeans. Like he would make good money for. That's what he made. He made a good living. And he was part of a group of Creoles in New Orleans, and they all made a good living. And they were like, okay, where are we going to get those? They were hoping either for some category or to be called white or whatever it was. They had to find out. The thing about Plessy was, if you looked at him at the time, you might not have been able to tell him. Yeah, red hair. Yeah, lighter, he was lighter than black. He was a mix. He was real. So they wanted to test it. They wanted to test this. So how do they test? You have to have standing before you can test. So they have him get on a train or a bus, and they have him sit in front, where he's not supposed to sit. As a person who's, and I'm using the term colored, that was the legal term of the time, and nobody notices. It's essentially just racist. So one of the other guys goes, those little kids, let's try this. Why are they doing this? Well, they're alerting the driver. Well, I don't think this racial discrimination so that they can have standing to test this case out. It works. They have standing. The problem is the Supreme Court. What is the Supreme Court rule? Separate but equal. And that stands until 1954, Brown v. Board of Education. Now, a couple of things are happening in American society. It is no coincidence that the civil rights era occurs when it does. There's about 10, 15 years after World War II. There had been a black middle class in America. But in World War II, we sent all these people off to war. There was an incredibly tight labor shortage. When I go into the work, you get Rosie the Riveter pictures. You get black men entering jobs that they would not have been allowed to, and they're paying really good wages. In fact, wages in America are getting so good during this period because there's so much demand for labor to feed the war machine that they actually put caps on how much people can make. But they still want to compete for the best labor, so they start offering them a thing called health insurance. That's how we get a system of health insurance benefits based on their employer. And that system sucks. You lose your job, you lose your health care. That's stupid. It's asinine. Sorry. I'm opinionated, right? I'm doing commentary, but it's just not a good system. You want people to be risk takers, to be entrepreneurs, and start businesses? What? Most people want to lose their health care. I mean, set up a system where everybody's got health care no matter what, and then they'll go and start their business. A lot of people don't choose not to start that business. They don't want to lose their kids' health insurance. So, what's Hitler's racial ideology? Those American Southerners, ones in the world who had right. Literally says there's a legalized racial hierarchy system. The American Southerners have done it. Jim Crow, he's 22 Americans. Hitler, pretty well legal. So Americans after World War II are seeing, okay, happy segregated. He did fantastic. We had an Adolf Hitler who wasn't on the same side of the argument as him. Obviously, naturally. And then you have this expansion of a black middle class. What happens when people become middle class? When you invest in the education of their kids, those kids not 10, 15 years later grow to be lawyers. And they start something called NAACP, the National Advancement, or the National Association for the Advancement of Color. Right? What's that? Let's say it again. Oh, congratulations. Oh, fantastic. So NAACP, because of major force in this social movement, is to get around Board of Education. So it's just, well, what I'm trying to show here is it's a materialist argument, essentially, that it's not a coincidence that you get a creation or expansion of the black middle class, and then about 10, 15 years later, you've got this entire civil rights movement that the country became United. And you got Adolf Hitler. All of these things were happening at the same time. And Harry Truman basically says, and also Dwight D. Eisenhower, who's the general who will later become president, basically say, okay, it's time for this military to be and we act like it was easy. And I'm here to remind you, it's not. Okay, so here's some of the things that happened. So the military did a really good job of it, but the process is uneven. The Marine Corps had significant examples of interracial violence in the Vietnam era. In 1964, Klan members and targeted a black Army Reserve lieutenant colonel. There was on-base Klan activity at Camp Pendleton in California, and there were literally hundreds of incidents of interracial violence within the U.S. military. And these racial tensions that Lewis need. Okay. So we'll get to more examples, and Lewis is going to provide us with some more examples of that. But what was the nature of violence in Vietnam? In Vietnam, they said that they were doing counterinsurgency theory. They were doing counterinsurgency. They were trying to win hearts and minds. Oftentimes, the people who talk the most about hearts and minds aren't actually doing it in practice. They're thinking of it in terms of violence. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, a little story about to kind of illustrate what counterinsurgency is and how you have to think about it holistically. My mother was a captain in the army in Vietnam. She was in the nursing corps. That was all women could do at that time. And her best friend would go on to become one of the highest ranking black women in the army in the 1980s. And Clarice was a very tall black. She was about 6 feet tall. She could have been a Ranger Brigade. And I say that not kidding. She went to Tuskegee, one of the historically black colleges. And the historically black colleges were all about this idea of the talented 10 that were educating youth to raise up the rest of us. Right? And the idea is that talented 10 will raise up everybody else. You got your boys, kind of the intellectual father of that. Purebred, black folk, and all of that great stuff. So she could only be a nurse, a school teacher, or a social worker. Those were the things women could do if they attended one of those schools. So she was frustrated. She didn't need to be trained as a secretary. It's amazing. She had a prayer, black hat, green beret. And he had his own tribe. Yeah, the tribe of Wall. French called them the Montagnards. They were a nomadic hill people. Real short. When I say these things, like, don't assume like these are racial judgments, right? If a racial group is short, that's all due to nutrition and sociological issues. Ever seen the movie Gran Torino, anybody? This is the mall. The gangsters in there, and the main kid, the protagonist, Clint Eastwood. These are the Hmong people. They were a nomadic people in Southeast Asia. They did not get along well with the Vietnamese. They were not communists. Communism was going to collectivize capital, much like private property in the United States led defense land. It was good for nomadic peoples. It's going to make essentially their style much better than anything possible. It's going to wipe out their style. So they didn't like the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese didn't like them. So what the French figured out was we'll go up there, give them guns and money. They can deny that space to the Vietnamese. Well, the Americans come in and do the same thing, except on a larger scale. So imagine you're part of this Southeast Asian tribe, you're about 4 feet tall, and this huge black guy rolls in, muscles, guns, money. He speaks your language. The black guy speaks this language. Have you ever seen a black guy before? Oh, ignorant in the true sense, right? They've seen the French before, they've seen Japanese, they like them, they're persistent. They've seen, the Chinese before, they've seen these white guy French, seen white Americans, then this black guy shows up. And he's a big man in the village because he's provided guns, money, and training so that they can find defenses. That's cool. One day, he's sitting around the campfire with them. and they're cracking jokes. And he tells the conversation in turn, he knows they're saying, you know, like, what? What did you say? You know, like, do you know what? You got can you see? He goes, yeah, so those stories and music stories of the reading news. They never seen like they see a black guy in the girl, what do they make? He looks like this, what do they make? What do they, and of course she's 6 feet tall, right? So of course that's their first introduction to the black. Yes. Now why am I telling you this story? Counterinsurgency is about culture, understanding incentives, and it is about new cultures being. Now, when they raise this, when they're like, let's see what like, genuinely sense of true ignorance. Not that ignorance is, we're going to code that and say, I say you're ignorant. No, they just genuinely don't know. That is how counterinsurgency works, right? Is you go and you work with the locals, and they provide their own security. And I can give you lots of examples. They essentially become a paramilitary force that is going to work. Well, what did Westmoreland do with that force? It was very effective at defending their own territory. He picked them up and he said that he might be beats and other aliens outside their own area. So I think that or as a got him and scatter branch under the ability. This is exactly what happened to Central America. Colonials were the exact way and friends of Indian born by word. Anytime the Americans were defending their own territories where they lived in their farms, they were very good. They were defending their families. Now they might have been separated when they were defending the general area. The many times that go fight a friend in India somewhere else, and they were feeding their families to Indian raids from other groups. They never fight. So that's why I say this. I'm telling you, hearts, they don't know what that means. They don't actually understand good counterinsurgency theory. It's thinking man's warfare. We were doing a good job. We focused on body count. Man, there's a dead body on the ground. Well, it's a military age man. It's a man. 14 men could carry a gun. Must have been an insurgent. So, well, that's what you're probably talking about. Especially that seems. Yeah, so this one was having to do with honey. It was like keeping score like that. So, and then more on this one would happen, you know, I'm saying he wants down. So, you should have made this information. Should have been able to keep up. It's like about the one that says, well, my dad was a high school teacher here, and he was a young teacher, and all of a sudden some of the girls are like distraught in back in class, between classes. And he goes, okay, what's going on? You know, one of the girls is holding a picture, and it's her boyfriend. She's taking you're older than her, you know, that I didn't, you know. And he sent her a picture, and it was a picture of him holding a severed head of a Vietcong fighter and him smoking. That's what he sent back to his girlfriend. Now today, we remember the operator, that would consider a war. Those things were common. Those things happened. They were not within the rules of warfare. The official military policy was no, we shouldn't be doing those things, they shouldn't be happening, but they did. They did. And we didn't do enough systematically to stop it happening. There was a dehumanizing language toward the Vietnamese. You would hear these racial pejoratives being used. And the nature of the counterinsurgency is going to get frustrating. Let's say a village fires at you in your unit, you get really pissed off, and you go into that village and you can't find who's shooting at you. So you decide to get really angry, and you lose control, and you start and chill. And in the middle of a massacre like that, and this being live, an American lieutenant helicopter pilot comes in, and he and some of the other soldiers with him are trying to stop this disease. And they report this incident. And this incident becomes a very famous and polarizing event because it's a clear war. It is not helpful to the war effort, but there is sympathy for the soldiers who engage in it. They are fighting a war on your behalf, and you're judging how they do it. You don't know how many Syrians. The third argument that is still a lot of innocent people. Those people's brothers, cousins, and extended family members are going to go kill other Americans and yours. We have a rule of So we set up these rules of warfare. We do good by doing good, right? Set up these rules of warfare because it actually saves Americans. You not feel like that at the moment when you're taking fire and then willing to respond in a limited fashion, depending on the rules of engagement. But avoiding things like the My Lai massacre are how you win the hearts and minds of the local population, avoiding those things. Also, you don't lose the hearts and minds of the populace back. A lot of insurgencies end, when the whole public finds out what's really going on. It says, we're not going to. Yes.
So we in this situation in China, you have a village fire already, and you can't farm it. You just like
Or you can't go around killing people.
And what are you going to do this?
I mean, I'm not going to deign to tell you tactically exactly what will happen. But the rules of engagement are going to be set such that, for example, you go and search every place. You can go and occupy for a little while. Eventually, you're going to have to get back to it. What has likely happened is that the insurgents have spoken in the village, and they're coming into the village and then melting into the jungle outside. Sir Robert Thompson's master stroke was to take the villages and basically put walls around, and then create a called strategic areas. And then the insurgents didn't have to rebuild. Things like that. So, and so just that works. And so it's an abysmal failure. In Malaysia, it worked. In Vietnam, when they tried it, it was a failure. They didn't fund it very well. So, like, the walls weren't complete. So there were what were the narrative elements that Beam was working? He's got a lot of people coming home with PTSD. They may not have called it PTSD at the time, but it was post-traumatic stress disorder. They've got a sense of betrayal. You gave up on us. We are anti-communist. We're glorifying weapons and an unending war. Wanted to bring the war to civilians and leaders. He said, in Vietnam, wasn't it convenient for you? You got to send us to go fight your war for you, and you chug along your economy like nothing was happening. And it was just like an extracurricular activity. But for us, it was our lives, right? So these are the narratives that are feeding into this. My Lai was a betrayal of soldiers. We went and prosecuted those soldiers. And they were convicted. You know what else happened? Some of them were essentially farmed. I think there was so much public support for them. They couldn't stop them. It's a little reminiscent of January 6th, right? We have an obvious crime. We're convicted of the crime. And then politically, they get pardoned. That sets an interesting precedent. You also have stagflation. My lord, the economy is really important to how we think and how we view the world. I didn't realize how sensitive to inflation. Inflation at 2.5% is absolutely normal. It's good for your economy. You wouldn't want deflation. Deflation is bad for that of an economy. Inflation. Sorry, I cursed. We're in college. Right? Everybody's going to the fire. Yeah, deflation is really bad. But inflation, 2.5%, that's the Fed's target, or 2% is the Fed's target, 2.5% is basically normal. So zero. Well, we had a percent. We got 90%. We thought that was really high. You got to tighten up the interest rates. You have to do all kinds of things to get yourself out of that. Because we're spending so much on the war in Vietnam, it was very difficult for them to do that. So you got a stacking economy, plus inflation, where things are getting more expensive. And people are getting really mad. Richard Nixon, right before the election, he started putting price controls on hamburgers. Because if you watch the evening news, the man on the street interview they did was with a woman who was a housewife, and she was saying, look at the price. Look at the price of the hamburger. And you used to get it for this. Now I can't get the hamburger meat for this. Now I have to stop feeding my family meat. That happened. So you put price controls on hamburger meat. The problem with price controls is things cost what they cost, basically supply and demand. You put price controls on things, you end up rationing. All the stuff sells out. Have you ever done it at HEB? When you go in there and they have a really good price on something, they say you look at two, only buy two of them, they're rationing. Because they know you're gonna buy up. If you have the chance to buy those at that price, you're gonna buy it all up. I know you guys think I'm a hippie with that professor. I don't make fun of socialists. Yeah, into mm-hmm. Uh, or people pay by or probably the Civil War law would be doing. Yeah, you look at it like or when you bring that at most times. There's sometimes very cool. Yeah, I saw when this person doesn't know says for best. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we got to start appealing to different social norms. Let me give you a quick example. Hugo Chavez, socialist leader of Venezuela, he says, well, diapers are too expensive. People can't afford to buy diapers. So he says, price controls on the maximum amount you can charge diapers. Well, the diapers are no longer profitable. So all the diaper factories are like, you can't make a profit with diapers. So they shut down the diapers. What happens to diapers? What? They're not being made. There are no diapers. At some point, Venezuelans just lost diapers. Yeah, access to diapers. He's right. That's when the economy too much dangerous things happen. If you fail to intervene in the economy, sometimes dangerous things happen. Let me give you an example. Did I tell you about the Irish potato famine? Yeah, so the British come in, conquer Ireland, they basically turn the Irish into tenant farmers, and then they limit the number of crops they can grow, so basically they're now only being able to grow themselves potato. And then lights periodically with the potato crop, people start starving it. The old British aristocracy, they had less liege, no obligation, less liege. Now people talk about this like it's a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. No less, most people, especially on TikTok, have no idea for actually. Um, like the blessed liege much to rich people, and you're like, if only they had that. The blessed liege is the noble obligation to those that you're responsible for. And the British aristocracy saw that their Irish subjects were dying, and they said, "Oh no, this is terrible." So in the late 1700s, there was a potato blight, and they intervened in free markets, and they said, "You cannot export food out of Ireland until people stop starving to death in Ireland." Because the truth is, you're still there's plenty of food there for people not to starve. The problem is, if the people outside of the country get higher prices, well, then Indians say, "Oh, this shit off," even though there's people starving. So they put an export control on Ireland until the prices stabilize to make sure they're actually safe. Sorry. Flash forward to the 1840s, it happens again, except this time the British are like, free market capitalism. But they didn't call it that at the time, they called it laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire, French form, hand off the economy. Let it do what it's going to do. That's the best thing for it. The problem is, yes, the economies will equilibrate. We'll find an equilibrium. It will stabilize. But millions of people can die. And that's exactly what happened. A million Irish people died. A million other Irish people were like, "Oh, if we stay here, we're going to starve to death. So we better show the dead bodies down. Those who go to the United States can." That's what happened. It's all Irish. That's how this came to be. So capitalism is wonderful. Free market is wonderful. But sometimes you have to intervene. It's very simple to know when it's intervening and not such. And that's when it kills them. I can give you examples of socialist economies killing millions of people. I can give you one or two examples of capitalist economies killing millions of people by not being willing. All economies are mixed. Socialism, capitalism, you still believe in Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, all economies are mixed. They're hybrids, right? That's the reality. Stagflation was happening in the United States. You had massive inflation, and then you had a stagnant economy that was moving down the road. People were imagine coming back, you're from the military, trying to get a job, reintegrating into life, and that's what you're coming back to. And then you've got all these other narratives you pump down your throat. So, Beam starts building up a training camp, essentially. So, building the underground. He gets a veteran board land grant. Camp Fuller is 50 acres of land. He starts a thing called the Klan Border Watch. So the Klan is going to go and patrol the U.S.-Mexico border. A harassment campaign against Vietnamese fishermen. So after, in the 1970s, Vietnam ends. Think about what happened to all the Vietnamese who had been fighting as our allies. American CIA operatives essentially set up boats, helicopters, and anything they could to get out as Saigon was done. They got as many of them out of the United States, they got as many of the United States, and a lot of them ended up right in the Houston area. And they became fishermen off the Gulf Coast. And they didn't get necessarily below local fishermen. Why? There were so many outliers, i.e., the Vietnamese were used to living 12 people in a small little RV, and we're okay with that. And so they were giving each other credit loans and things like that within their kinship networks. In many ways, they were outcompeting the local white fishermen. And so there ended up being these conflicts there. And the Klan inserted itself into those types of conflicts. So they started a harassment campaign against the Vietnamese. They created a network of paramilitary camps. And they started the rise of what became white power movement. Okay, so paramilitarism. You got all these different versions of it. You got the Klux Klan. And B knows that the post-war environment is good for Klan recruitment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about history. When does the Klan get started? Of course, of the Klan is in the post-Civil War environment. The stuff about people wearing the white robes, that actually doesn't really get going until the 1920s. They were wearing masks. They were hiding their identities. They weren't necessarily wearing, the pointy white hats and all of that. That's the first concern. Lots of state by Ulysses S. Grant movies. Mountains on Ulysses S. Grant. The leftists will tear down a Ulysses S. Grant statue. I've never underestimated the ability of Yankee leftist shoes. Let me tell you about Ulysses S. Grant. He was indeed the last American president to own slaves. He inherited them from his wife's family. He was never really a slave. He inherited them when he was a war hero for the Mexican American War. He inherited these slaves. He has them for a year or two, and he basically looks at them and says, "What?" And he gets himself in that poverty. It's his family involved to the point where he's like trying to chop wood and sell wood and alleviate issues of poverty. He had alcohol issues. Never when he was doing something amazing. He was in the army, really. It's always been they sent him when he was in the army, and then they sent him to some back. He gets to work. Started he was Christian. At great personal expense, he frees his lips. He joins the Union Army. He kicks ass everywhere he goes. He eventually becomes the Union commander of the entire Union Army. And he puts together a strategy for all these different separate Union armies, fighting in coordinated fashion. And he ends slavery by winning that war. Then, after Andrew Johnson, after Kennedy gets assassinated and Johnson takes over, he gets himself elected president, and he does the Klan Acts, a series of legislation so they can put down the Klan. He does counterinsurgency operations against the Klan during radical Reconstruction. He defeats the Klan. There was this election in 1878 that I just told you about. And essentially, radical Reconstruction ends, and that's when we get Jim Crow. And the Klan doesn't, the Klan too much. You don't see a clan surge until another clan surge until right before, right around. We'll pick up that discussion on Tuesday. That makes decisions forward. Well, we see that there are different clan surges, so let's go back to the first ones. I think I already talked to you guys a little bit about we have Civil War in the United States. It's about one issue and one issue only out of states' rights. It was about states' rights and have slaves. It's an economic issue of the day. And in fact, we know that because the Confederates so much exists. This is about protecting our peculiar institution, the peculiar institution of the state. It was like they were acknowledging this is rare. Nobody else has this one. You gotta remember, the British had actually mobilized their entire navy, and Britain was the great power of uh, for that. It was in part because Britain knew how to manage the balance of power in Europe. So what Britain would do is see that Europe was kind of like divided into all these principalities. There were these large powers. So what Britain would do is say, why not decide except we see the balance is tipping one way or the other. So Britain turned itself into this really important maritime power. They were not a land force. They could put muster land forces, but they were very big. What made them really powerful is that they were maritime powers. The United States is also a maritime power. Yes, we can muster a land-based army if we need to, but the ability of the United States to engage in power projection throughout the world is really based on our need. We have this one amazing geographical, we have amazing. We are defended on both sides by two large oceans. Oh, they're big and beautiful. Come try to renovate us, please don't. Let us know how. We also want to maintain a very powerful navy. So let me bring this all to current events. How do maritime powers operate versus how do continental powers operate? This is a tangent, but you just need to know about that. Okay, so continental powers, like we have talked to a little bit already, they lend themselves to authoritarianism. Why? You have this big army. And usually you're dealing with vast open plains in places where continental powers tend to succeed. And in those vast open plains, you can roll an army on through. Imagine the Mongol hordes coming through on horseback, and then imagine Soviet tanks going through vast open Russian steppes. Well, that's great. So what do you need to maintain power? A big army. What's the problem with keeping a big army around? What they look at you and go, well, why can't I do this? Then you have to be taught. It's a mistake. That's just French, or it looks a mistake. So one part of the government takes over the levers of government from another part of the government and takes over the entire government. And when you back coup d'etat and the Russian in the 1960s, it's had nothing to do with since. Very good. It's Therefore, with Edward Luback, as one of my early professors once said, this was my conservator. He said, he's a wordsmith, watch out. I mean, wordsmiths, people who will sometimes write when he's twisted and tortured logic. But they make it sound, sometimes by sitting reasonably old and awkward. And then later on with arguments, I'm sure it's care of the truth. You're arguing with me for the sake of argument. That's just sophists. Who were the sophists? So why Socrates played it? Socrates comes along, and he's this weird guy, and he goes around and he asks people questions. These questions, the whole Socratic, the idea of teaching by asking people questions. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this part? What about this part? Well, what was he really reacting to? Socrates was reacting to the sophists. The sophists were guys that could teach you how to do a really good speech, a passionate speech. And the thing is, in Athens, which was an democracy, sort of democracy, unless you were a slave, so limited democracy. If you could give a really good speech, you could get the government to spend money on your bridge project, you'd make a lot of money. Get that out of the country. All you had to do was sway the temples to be by giving a really good speech. Do the sophists care about the truth? Whether or not building that bridge was a good idea or not? They didn't care. They would sell you the ability to make a good speech, to write a good speech. They were interested in the rhetoric of it for the sake of the Socrates and his student Plato, who were widely considered the foundations of Western civilization, had a problem. They're like, what about truth? What about goodness? What about justice? Are these arguments for the sake of arguing so that we can all be subject to demagogues who come along and consider us and have us digress to the narrative when we care about truth and justice? Now, Plato, he wrote his book on the creation of philosopher kings. The idea that people go through this intense, rigorous, physical and intellectual education process, and they would be led into really government effectively be what we would consider kind of benevolent. He wrote that. He wrote that up. Many people in Western civilization consider Socrates and Plato a precursor to Christianity. The idea that it is a universal values. And so when we talk about universal values, meaning liberalism, don't get that confused with liberal versus conservatives. No, we're not classical liberalism. This is like what we like Western civilization. What is classical liberalism? It is the idea that individuals have this inherent power. One of the murders, the one of the screws, they have to have this inherent power. Now, you can reason that out. You can talk about natural law. You can say because God, we got the Holy Spirit in all of us. Whatever version we believe that everybody has the inherent human value. Almost every church to this kind of consensus on that all people have their human value. But in liberal democracy, in the classical liberal sense, we believe in genuine free markets. We believe in some level of self-determination for the individual level. Well, we believe in things like rule of law. And the idea of rule of law in the Western rule of law is to say, at some point, somebody has to tell you what the truth is. You have to be able to and abide by the courts. That's at some point you can't just do whatever you want because you were elected. Well, yeah. Was it right to go along with you? They actually don't do process. There were literally laws that they wrote down and said they could distribute. But is it legally right? So getting at fundamental ideas of truth. Continental powers tend to digress in authoritarianism, we don't care about this. We just care about power. Why do American powers stop? Why do Britain call? Nobel Prize winning economists named Acemoglu and Robinson, they both wrote a book called, but it was based on all their economics work. But it was basically saying why nations fail. And their answer to this question was non-inclusive institutions, extractive institutions, where essentially the leadership is maintaining power by extracting from the local population. Those countries, they might have economically developed at a certain point, they never really much. Why does the United States have we had such a great economic run? Inclusive institutions. What does that mean? No, that's pretty good. We'll see how long we can maintain this. We all have it actually pretty good. We coming out of COVID, we've actually reduced inequality. Wages have gone up for the lowest people, the lowest end. We live higher per capita lifestyles than many people around the world, including some of the developed world. We get some things wrong, like healthcare. We're not very good around healthcare. But for the most part, I know I'll say this on the face. I know everybody backs my economics. Joe Biden was the best economic periods. Yeah, their names were overpriced. Nobody's complaining about names. It's the entire. Uh, that's we kind of that's how we. But we are massive. Uh, and Britain, because the merchant class was essentially able to leverage the British government, they had more institutions they were able to establish through things like the Magna Carta going back 1004, but all these little things in common. It actually empowered the kings, but it empowered the world. And they were able to invest in creating this amazing trading nation and an amazing set of ships. It could then also be an amazing navy. And maritime powers want to keep open the sea lanes of communication so that we can have free trade. And so when the United States begins its empire building, a lot of people say, oh, it's post World War II, it's yada, yada, yada. Ever heard of the Spanish American War? In earliest days of late days of the 19th century, earliest days of the 20th century, we basically defeat Spain in the Western Hemisphere. We take Cuba, we take Puerto Rico, we take the Philippines, occupy the Philippines in these really nasty ways. People sometimes forget this. Um, so we're occupying the Philippines and we get these insurgencies coming against us. And the Philippine insurgents would essentially they hold machetes in two hands, they'd have their friends bind up their hands, and then they'd get high on the throat. I can't remember what it was. They wouldn't feel pain, such as unless they got PCP. And they would go rush the Americans. They would just machete the Americans, you know, in their defense position. So General Blackjack Pershing, if you've ever heard of him, very famous general. He's in charge of the occupation of the Philippines. And that is when he essentially commissions the events in 1911. So what it is? 1911, what makes it? Colt 45. 45 is a big round and it's slow. The beauty of a slow and big round is what happens when it hits the person. And God's love it well. So why? The officers have this is when these guys with machetes got into the lines, the guys with the rifles actually had to spin round, had like a long range. They didn't have soccer power. Right through these guys, if they weren't feeling, if they were high on something, they weren't feeling the pain. And it took them a while to die. They kill Americans in the buses. So you had officers standing up, boom, boom, boom. Make sure that the guys got through the lines. You died. This is the Philippines. That's you know what American powers do? Only one God said something. Hey, like the person says, hey guys, you actually want to why don't you set up a brand covenant? We'll let you do that. And you just let us have access to a port at a specific place so we can have our data meeting now. And we promise we're all going to have open sea lanes communication and free trade, and we'll leave. And that's what we did. So the blackjack version went, it's called on a Filipino golf course. But the negotiations played out, and we left. Now, periodically, the Filipinos were very occupied. And the Americans stop. Chinese Navy comes in and starts bullying their ships, literally bullying them, stuff like that. And the Filipinos go, what? Where's we miss you? We have a defense agreement. I'm like, oh, I remember you. Okay. I'm trying to go back to the day, but not when it's going off in the late 90s. There's this volcano eruption. It kicked up so much dust it acted over years for a little while. Basically, for lack of a better term, that was the thing. But we got other ports in other places in Southeast Asia, namely Singapore. Why does Vietnam want us around? Why are we supporting Vietnam? How about war against them? They're free economies. Yeah, China. They're all realizing that the rise of China is irredentist and revanchist. Okay, let me break down what those words mean. Irredentist means calling back to a distant past. So for China, the whole South China Sea is theirs. Once upon a time, the South China Sea was theirs, and these were all vassal states that had to pay us tribute, and they will go back to that. So if you're Singapore, if you are Vietnam, if you are Thailand, if you are Japan, if you are South Korea, the rise of China has to be. And keeping the United States around is something that any elite or anybody with half a brain wants to keep the ceilings of humiliation moving. The system that the United States established in the post World War II environment is freaking amazing. By having open trade, your standard of living is good. I guarantee you, just look at a single stitch of clothing you are wearing, a single electronic product you have. Any. All of it was built not just in East Asia, probably in the United States. It's an accurate design. Most electronic was built in various different countries throughout East Asia and probably went through the Straits of Malacca on its way to get to you. Some of it was built in Mexico. It's amazing. All of that allowing a comparative and competitive advantage that has reduced the price. You can buy an amazing laptop for what? $200 to $300? You can buy a really nice one for 1,000. Wow. We'll see how long that lasts as we start to put more implications on tariffs on free trade and whatnot. We'll see. I guarantee you it will raise costs. It will lead to inflation. It'll take a while. See how long it sets in. So, Britain's maritime power. And at some point, they had a genuine moral change heart. Somewhere in the 1800s, this no, slavery was wrong. It's outlawed. But not like they say that slavery was wrong, but it was outlawed. They used their navy and they went around, really, for lack of a better term, packing up Portuguese and anybody who was still slavery. And there were these famous cases where you ever watched the film The Honest One? There were Portuguese slavers who were still bringing slaves across the Atlantic. And when they found the forts that were also forts that were allowing this to happen, the British went and found, as soon as they were finding, they would go and shell them from the sea. Law of the sea used to be 3 miles, 3 nautical miles. It was considered your territorial waters. We extended it to 12 because the United States wanted to extend it because we realized that really big fishing waters that was the last like. But why was it 3 nautical miles? Do you really know? Yeah, go ahead. Maritime power. Britain was a maritime power. They essentially outlawed slavery. So people knew that we went into a system of chattel slavery in the United States. Where, what do I mean by chattel slavery? You became a slave by being born in the United States. You couldn't get any slaves from outside. So that changed the nature of the institution of slavery itself. And then the United States, particularly in the North, there's an abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement genuinely believes slavery is moral law and is willing to fight home war. They try to avoid it. I mean, this was always this tension in the early days of the American Union. But eventually the Confederacy says, enough is enough, it's an institution, eventually shut us out and let's get rid of it. Our entire livelihoods are based on this. For them, it was viewed as existential. And that's when the Civil War begins. The Civil War ends with Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. History. The North was always guaranteed to be. I mean, never guaranteed, right? War is about both wills, and Civil War historians say that. But in terms of economic might, number of people, warfare fighting capacity, knowledge, the Union, the North was going to be. They were going to be able to produce more. Now, there were times when Southerners had advantages, i.e., some of the best generals were from the South. Robert E. Lee was widely considered one of the best military minds at the time. I actually think he's a loser. If you look at his battle success rate compared to this. This success rate was amazing. As long as that guy was drinking, like, nobody could beat that. But his extra stroke was to unite the Union armies and grossly outnumber the and unite them in one conscious. And they were going to be very reasons. Americans totally. That's the point at the end of 1865. Man for man, the United States has probably the biggest land on Indian. And it's probably the best I know. But that's not our national state of being. Our national state of being is to be a maritime power. Notice, we're sending immigrants right now to Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay. Where's Guantanamo Bay? Cuba. Why the hell do we have a naval base in Cuba? Anybody know the history of that? What? Communism? Communism doesn't result in massively less terrorists or naval base. Isn't it like Cuba wanted to use the United States or something? End of the Spanish American. The United States occupies Cuba. And what do America's power do? They occupy. No, the state. Agree to us having a naval base, write that in your constitution. We'll call it the Platt Amendment after the guy in Platt who negotiated it. Set up a friendly government and we live. But and that lasted until we try to go to this. But we get some arguments because we love to stop. Try this. We'll fight for every inch. What I would say though is it's good for the tourists or immigration and immigrant detention and put that in Guantanamo Bay. I'm gonna be honest, it's objectively stupid. I think. Why? It's really freaking expensive. If I think of a way to burn money, that would be how you burn money. Guantanamo Bay, in terms of blowing terrorists, was a $2 million. If you went into actually how much it costs, well, you have to get those guys lawyers. So how do you get them lawyers? How do they speak to a lawyer face to face? You gotta fly their lawyer out. That's a cheap flight. It's not like you go fly in a van and then fly over the base Guantanamo Bay. It's gonna be a military. You know, expensive. What the military does is it's ridiculously expensive. Yeah, I just flew from Arlington. There's 5 seminaries that are there that information stuff. And I suppose one of the pilots is that over keep the lights. What did he say? Her. I don't know. I don't even know. He was just a speakers thing. Just getting established in there. Was I know sees that comment, the other question, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of military planes coming. It's going to say says, do you here in the United States? There's plenty of potential facilities here in the United States. And if they're overflowing, you're going to set up tent cities. I don't know if you're going to 16 up here. English thing. Isn't it? It's called 711. President Bush. Yeah. They're negotiating that. So the idea is when you're claiming refugee status, you don't have to Mexico legit. You're supposed to go to the first claim negotiation safe. El Salvador is still seems very good in this place.
President Chris.
Yeah, well, I really say quite a lot of, and like, they, this is the thing we're all grappling with. There are objective security needs. People feel safe. In fact, I'm about to publish an article in Solar Journal where they have apologists right now at places. And they understand things like research. There's no place to safer than others. There's also no denying that the process of water. We describe it as there for a lot of people. But even though people who went through these really nasty psychological treatment variations, they say, no, I don't let you feel that hard. They really don't give you up from the against the teach. Really, really, that's spiritual. Spiritual, you know, just imagine. A lot of us. Yes, so the question was, could that be safe for a public country? Why all of us safe? Yes. And this gets into all kinds of issues, right? Are they going to what do they fear? If you're feeling like you're in a transaction criminal organization like my girl, or next door tells president on the law, excuse their card countries, whether they sent with the process, whether they get sent, all that. It is complicated. Any of that stuff is better than going to sending somebody else out like that. Just in terms of pure cost. Like, if we actually care about saving US taxpayer money, don't send anybody to Guantanamo. You know. We keep Guantanamo Bay for what? Security in the Caribbean, build power for a jet in the maritime waters to keep open the sea lines of communication. That's what Guantanamo Bay is for. But post Civil American Civil War, we engage in a process known as radical reconstruction. We start rebuilding up the American South and reintegrating through slaves. We started with like African skills, trains, we recruit slaves, how to do occupations, things like that. An insurgency gets going known as the Ku Klux Klan. I talked to you a little bit about this. Ulysses S. Grant gets elected president, effectively puts down Trump. And he knows how to run important military. He knows what an insurgency entails and how to deal with it. You run informants. You get people who are inside the organization supportive to you. You get information. You get intelligence. You target who the leaders of this terrorist group are. You're going to get into the U.S. They pass the Klan Act, which will make it easier to prosecute. You Ku Klux Klan, and they effectively succeed in brutality insurgency. Klan gets assassinated. But it doesn't matter. Because there's a disputed election in 1878, the Republicans actually win, but although the Democrats actually win, H.B. Sullivan actually wins, but the Democrats and the Democrats basically say it's the wrong Republicans. We'll lay out presence, yeah, and it's over to all. We handed rather construction, and you don't need to have a certain party. They essentially had the Union Army out of there. There was nothing to stop them. They became government. And that's when they established the Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow essentially was, talk about that, was Ferguson, 1896, had a transition the law. It's allowed. They can do that. And that continues right up until around 1894. That's the first land surge. The absolute is the second grand surge comes after World War I. You've got a film, The Birth of the Nation. We'll talk about that. That was a pro-Confederate film. It was one of the first silent films in the United States in the early 1900s. That you've got a lot of soldiers from World War I. They're disgruntled for various reasons. They're not being integrated into society well. A whole series of things. People coming home with PTSD. And this is one of the key things that Kathleen Ballou points out. You can really track surges in white supremacy movement terrorism in the United States with the post-war environment. I mean, the social dislocations that happen with war, veterans coming home, and not home. It's a vast war. Some get recruited in or starts to marginalized and they become fodder for by white supremacist terrorist groups. There's a third branch post World War II / Korea in response to the civil rights movement. Some people were frustrated with some of the things that came out and reacted to some of the things that happened during the civil rights movement. So you've got this progression where civil rights movement established, where there's a reactionary backlash to that, particularly in the American South, where, for example, in Alabama, there's rights protests, the police are called in to essentially beat people. That gets played on national news. The whole American public goes, okay, this is. The reaction, because of the popularity of civil rights movement, it actually goes underground and becomes essentially like an insurgency. So you see this rising spread. Now, this third wave of the Ku Klux Klan is thoroughly infiltrated by the U.S. government. The FBI is really good at infiltrating these white supremacist groups. There's a program called the COINTELPRO, and COINTELPRO is going after the Klan. He was going after anything that the government just deemed as subversive. So, at various points, people inside the FBI decided that Martin Luther King himself was a really bad guy. It was subversive. He had socialist tendencies. One of the things that they did, and it's just like something up, they wrote a letter saying basically, hey, you know your cheating. How did they know they were cheating? They had an illegal. So they illegally acquired that. And then they wrote him a letter, it's a really nasty letter, basically saying, why don't you kill yourself? It's like this long letter of like, hey, you're having all these extraterritorial affairs. It's going to find out when we reveal it. Why don't you kill yourself? Try to get Martin Luther King himself. No, this is interesting. Okay. Now, what do we remember Martin Luther King? What's that civil rights movement? Nonviolent protests? What's the guy supposed to do? Right? Well, like, it was obviously a civil rights issue, right? So COINTELPRO going out. According to Martin Luther King, there were wedges that Martin Luther King was going to start talking about economic that basically certain social policies might certain distribution. Now, is economic redistribution antithetical to the American Constitution? Not necessarily. Constitution is absolutely, well, not absolutely. Well, this is the argument of my along with us. It makes no statement on God's. I would argue in one place, and there's a place where the U.S. Constitution is very clear on some level on the protection of basic rights. Can the government take your property? Yes. The answer is yes. It can declare eminent domain. But what does the government have to do to take your property? Compensation. That's compensation. Just compensation. Now you're gonna have a court hearing and we're gonna debate about what just compensation. They're working a little law. You're gonna say my house is worth $1 million. They're gonna say it's worth $2 million. Or you end up probably at $500K. It's gonna be really stressful. And the government scene during that process. But government has to pay more. So the government has to pay you. But the government ever taken over all property? The government? Well, they could, but in so doing, they've giving out a shit ton of capital. In which case, would they own all property? If you consider capital property, yes, or no. So my argument would be that the Constitution doesn't say something. Church is taking over. But grows. So you do that? That's completely. It doesn't really say anything about capitalism versus socialism or anything like that, with the exception of I think. But when the U.S. government was, the FBI was getting close to that, and they were in such Red Scare, anti-communist hysteria. Because of that, they engaged in these programs called COINTELPRO. And in the COINTELPRO programs, they were actually putting in undercover FBI agents for informants, and then they engaged in agents provocateur. Can anybody tell me what an agent provocateur is? Yeah, there's no just in name somebody like any that's there's no the idea of needing for this stuff that was sort of trap. People like entrapment, but it can actually in some ways in the sense of, for example, like let's say there's like a little civil rights group and they're going to do a peaceful protest, but there's a person inside the group that's like, oh, we should throw bricks through the windows. No, we should throw lots of contacts. And then when if they were to do that, or even this person was report that they were to do that, then that was just spy buying, right? Now, if you ever get a chance to watch on Netflix, there's a movie made about the Chicago Seven in 1968. There were riots at the Democratic, before the Democratic National Convention. The anti-war protesters showed up. They never released one of the major US DOJ reports. And there's this really interesting moment where they do in the former attorney general, he has 500 jury, and the attorney general asked him why they need this report. And they're like, he's like, because the Chicago Police fault. Basically, Chicago Police. Correct. There were a lot of periods in the incidents in the period. For example, one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, he gets shot and shoot out in Chicago, but if you go back and not look at the recommendation range, there's no evidence that you shoot. So there was a lot of stuff that didn't make government look very good in this COINTELPRO period. Now, in the same time, the Klan is creating its own quote unquote special forces unit. And you see a lot more military symbols and paramilitary nature in the book. So, a couple of interesting things are happening in this period. Used to be that the Klan couldn't stand the same. They were couldn't stand it. They understand why. From the front of the militia. Wow. This has changed. Well, I mean, in many ways, the police are very simple. Superiority by race, participation by race, yeah. But for a long time, American people were rich young, in the mid 20th century, they couldn't see it being seen. Klansmen beat the shit out of them. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, but a specific one from the Klansman's life experience. Socially. Well, nothing perfectly this. Now that was Hitler God. Nazis in the 1920s, their activity of political activity was so patriotic waters. Constantly they thought such as, that was a lot of mismanagement about that. And something that's repeated a lot of us. So don't worry. They're fascists. But why couldn't you find the same thing in real Nazis? All the Klansmen were veterans. We fought in World War II, all this town with them. It was standing. It didn't happen. You didn't see this shit where the Nazis and Klansmen could work together and become what's happening people call white power movement until Vietnam. Vietnam was important in terms of its timing. The Klansmen who had fought in World War II were aging out. They were old men, they weren't in parts of the movement as much anymore, but they were not. When that shit happened, all of a sudden you see the Klan and the neo-Nazis coming. And that's why she calls it a white power movement, because these divergent strands were actually coming together. So when we think of neo-Nazis, they wear combat boots, swastikas, camo fatigues, the shaved heads. What is this all? It's all paramilitary. It's all what you might look like coming out of boot camp, right? Shaved head, white shirt, camo fatigues, combat boots. So you start to see a paramilitarization of the dress as well in this period. So post Vietnam, and you start to see more paramilitary Klan activity. Klan border watch as paramilitarism, so you have people who are on patrols along the border, to keep immigrants out. You had guys like David Duke. David Duke, he running for, I think he might have actually been governor of Louisiana. Yeah, he was actually governor of Louisiana. He was a grand wizard in the KKK. And he's widely considered a major leader. He's a major leader in White Hollywood. Um, I'm gonna talk about Vietnamese refugees in the 1970s. I think I mentioned this a little bit. I don't know how I get that. Um, During Vietnam, we ran a counterinsurgency, and we had local allies. When South Vietnam fell, when Saigon fell, there was an extraordinary effort, oftentimes not really by the main U.S. government proper, but like CIA agents using all their contacts, all of their logistical capabilities to organize boat lifts and any way that they could to get their allies out of Vietnam, because they knew their allies would be killed. I had I'm my priest when I was in graduate school was he's Roman Catholic. And he told me he got caught. You know, and he told me about how it's since they was your education. The meters. I was saying, of course, sort of good you this saying, for sure. I don't know if you ever did this, glasses. No, glasses. Years, just falls out, and we were really which I just, was one of the mayors and all my buddies, grandparents, whatever, but we talked some about myself. And I don't know, it was the kind of way that he was, is on the one I happened over there. You know, I just, you know, come here, there's struggles again. Yeah. You know, as which instance I the Jews were, and he distinguished where the told years ago to tell me that kids want to talk about it, just some star with you just right that it's just some person that talk about this factor. Yeah. There's a story of John McCain. John McCain, the American senator, he died. Granted, she doesn't live in Republican. He lost it for Obama. Highly respected. But he was a fighter in Obama in Vietnam. He gets shot down. I think he might have been one of the guys flying like wild weasels. I might be wrong. What the wild weasel guys had to do was flying these jets, and their job was to get shot. What they would do is the Vietnamese service would walk onto them, and the minute they got a target to walk, they would come down and fall on the place. Because once the missile range took off, the electronics is in the air and puts the wildfire. It was like, oh, I missed this. You would have balls to do this way. Every time you're going up, it's like, okay, shoot me with this really lethal missile that is tracking me via radar. I'll juke the missile and then multiple missiles. Think about the fact of FXCE and Top Gun now, all this high top. That's amazing, Dave. So John McCain, I don't know if he was in one of those or he gets shot down and he ends up at Hanoi Hilton. And Hanoi was tortured for 6 years. They wanted to let out daddy's kind of said, no, there's guys who think they're longer. I don't go out before they did. So they didn't release him. And he tells the story. And he would be tied up in a cell at night. And they had his arms tied behind him. And they would lift him off the ground based on it, dislocating the ship. And they didn't want like one of the Vietnamese guards would come in and try. And he would loosen the ropes for him. And when he loosened the ropes for him, he drew his foot on the ground across, saying, like, I'm a Christian and this is just a violent thing. And in the morning, the guard had to make it look like he'd been in all night like that. And so in the morning, he would come back. And it was like an agreement between the prisoner and the guard. You put him back up at the end again. Yeah. And he would cross out the cross. So nobody could see. That was the principle of bees. It was next. It's really, really bad. Not that the United States hasn't done bad stuff, but stuff like that, just torture people for a long period of time, not for any purpose, just to make people suffer. It's really awful. It's a stain on the soul. We stain our souls. And it also puts the risk of friends that gets Americans killed, because those things can never be done. Like, I'm going to talk about America and you believe me. Like, I'm going to outbreak the other beginning. What did that do to terms from the United States? How many Americans died because of it? You do well anyway, right? When we do kind of things for people, it pays dividends. You may not be a drag along. USAID, for example. USAID goes and helps Zambia with HIV. Basically, HIV used to be a death sentence. You guys don't remember this. When I was growing up, AIDS was death sentence. You would hear about it. It was this thing you heard about. People died of. Famous rappers died. What? The mercury died. Lots of people, at least here, like lots of people died of. It was this horrible disease. And people like Anthony Fauci and the NIH and CDC, they basically worked and research, and they basically got lots of different ways to make it treatable. You don't have to die of HIV. It's not a test. You don't live in school. Cheap drugs. We figured it out. They're expensive for a while. So USAID, at one point in sub-Saharan Africa, in Zambia, a third of the working age population, age 18 to 45, had AIDS, HIV. A third of the working population is going to die. You know what that means? You know what that means? If a third of the working age population is sick and dying, it would destabilize that country. Who would come in and destabilize it? Maybe Al Qaeda. Maybe ISIS. So that didn't happen. We came in and we provided drugs on a fairly cheap basis, stabilized Zambia. And you know, a cool thing about Zambia, it's got all kinds of stuff with mining, and most of the American mining companies, they need to hire people who aren't dying of AIDS. And we gotta remember that. This wasn't a direct line of sight, but we gotta remember that. We got a stable country, no terrorism, and mining companies that are highly profitable, and how people can actually work mines without dying. Soft power. Another way that you maintain soft power is by taking care of your friends and your allies. One way that you do that is by giving refuge. So people follow. And this is like a courage, right? In Afghanistan, we had translators. Well, how do those translators? She translated from the Americans. The first people on the kill list for Taliban. So as many of them as we could, American soldiers were advocating, hey, get our translator, get our translator. I was playing something, and short back. Speaks perfect English. She sounds like an American with a slight accent. And I'm back with this whole family. Me and my kids, these kids, what we are stuff. Whole around thing. They cheated a little bit, so. A lot of handball went uncalled. In that thing. But I said something to that, you know, like, where you from? And he's like, where? I'm like, where? And he's like, that's the idea. And I'm like, where'd you come? And he's like, oh, I was a translator in Greece. And I got out and then it was six. I was like, oh, what's your time to leave? He's like, yeah, I was thinking got pretty bad. I was on campus. Young friend. God bless America. I love that. Who would want to with you if you let your friends, if you let your producers be informants and translators and collaborators get killed? So a bunch of American CIA, a bunch of American State Department, everything they do in getting is out. They got the long out of the motion cars. They put them in Wisconsin. It's freaking cold. Why you do that? You take the Southeast Asian hill people and put them in freaking Wisconsin and Detroit. It's like this is one of the coldest places in America. It's sticky. It's not in Vegas. So they had to do it. And some of them end up here in Houston. Now, when people immigrate, they immigrate like normally across the country. No, that's no mistake. They tend to collect good where they have social support networks. So they tend to concentrate in a place like Houston or Southern California. What am I talking about? I remember I grew up in a town that was almost universally Hispanic. My classes were 86% Hispanic when I was like, in my town. And then I got to Berkeley and I was like, wow, this is not an issue for like, I don't know what California is that. When you think about students. I was like, wow. And there was this incredible concentration in Asian population concentrations in the San Jose area, and then also in Southern California, where I went. UC for about years, probably for school at UC. So we get this concentration in Michelin, and the Vietnamese Michelin do a good job of competing well in this industry, in part because they're really needed. In fairly compressed conditions, imagine one trailer full of people, and it's 12 units on a trailer, they keep everything costs very low. They extend each other credit based on social credit, so they are able to keep their fishing vessels going, they work on their own fishing vessels, etc. etc. The white fishermen start to get frustrated. The white fishermen claim that there are these unspoken rules. Like, if you have a catch here and I'm catching a Russian shrimp, you don't come in right next to me and start catching shrimp. Is that rule written down this way? No. So Vietnamese would come in and be like, oh, you're catching, I'll try to catch fish here. And they're like, oh, you're getting in the way of my fishing. Da, 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 you're taking from my catch. So there was this perceived grievance. Everyone who goes back and is like, why do you prefer that team? Like, we're kind of selective in this. And it's not a real rule. It wasn't a law. It wasn't a reach. So you would get these grievances, and then you started getting the clan inserted itself here, and they started doing firewall attacks on the Vietnamese fishermen. And I can't remember which group it was, but I think it was ACLU. ACLU on behalf of these fishermen effectively sues the clan. And they sue them in a civil lawsuit. One of the beauties of the civil lawsuit versus a criminal lawsuit. In a civil lawsuit, in a criminal lawsuit, what can you do? Somebody's saying, I want you to testify against somebody, or I want you to testify against yourself. What can you do in a criminal case? What? Plead the fifth. Plead the fifth. Now, in a civil lawsuit, you can keep your mouth shut. But the jury can be instructed. Anything you have chosen mouth shut about, we can assume the worst against that person. So it puts a civil lawsuit, it's only about money, can't put you in jail. But a civil lawsuit can put you under more pressure in some cases to actually speak. And they do a really effective job of suing the clan, and they effectively sue them right out of the state of Texas. So where do they go? They go end up going up into the Pacific Northwest. Okay? And this is will be the stage of the next scenes as we go forward in this class. and as the moon is starting to grow. The next things will be uh, Ruby Ridge, Ireland, up and up the Northwest, Ruby Village, and others in that area. But it's not moved up that direction. Okay, so especially initially the welcome, enthusiasm versus anxiety. Vietnamese how to compete on lifestyle. Claims that Vietnamese do not follow laws or rules. These rules are in quotation marks because these are the norms. Okay? We're all watching right now a president that is not following the norms that previous presidents have followed. But there's nothing that says you necessarily have to follow a norm. If you wanted it to be required, you should have written it into law. There's a good argument for that, right? Like, I walk into the room, Josh, how you doing? How do you go to shake right? What? Because I have my hand out. I'm letting you know that my outstretched hand means this guy wants a handshake. It's a norm, exactly. And you'll call a social fact. It's not written down anywhere, and yet you just know it. That's norm. Social fact. It was a norm that every president did a full financial disclosure, disclose their taxes prior to running. It was such a norm that had never been violated before. And people thought it was required. Donald Trump came along and said, well, do I really have to? And they said, oh, whatever it is. Well, wait, so I don't have to. I can do 100 attempts with Donald Trump. He didn't follow the rule. Not necessarily law. Now, there are some things that I think follow laws that are going right now that are going to be sound. Regardless, you take it away there. We're going to eliminate birthright citizenship. That's written in the Constitution, bro. How many judges have now ruled on that one? Three by my count. Every federal judge that says that is lying. Yeah. We're going to shut down USAID. It's happening on a de facto basis. But as it works through the courts, we're going to find it. This was unconstitutional. Why? Because Congress said, when you sort that, that's Congress's job. President has to execute. Now, the president can fire individual people who are doing their job well, are executing well, but just go through a wholesale fire. Everybody, we'll see what the courts say about that. That's a problem, right? And you're going to see this play out. What he's doing is he's testing. We're going to go. He's testing. And it will have long-term implications. But this is about norms. Norms are going to serve Vietnamese agencies for high-ranking military, in some cases, working with the U.S. in their time in Vietnam. So a lot of them were actually fairly educated guys who might have been like colonels or generals for the South Vietnamese Army, might have been lieutenants, might have been captains, and so they're very anti-communist themselves. You can read someone who's anti-communist, go talk to a child of Vietnamese immigrants. They will be more anti-communist than anybody in that. They might be, well, actually, they might be. That's the thing people I don't think realize is that MAGA has appealed to a broader sector of people. Uh, you know, the Democrats have made that terrible mistake. They think that a civil rights, quote unquote civil rights leader represents everybody in that nation. This is the only way you can explain that Democrats would support a term like Latinx. Anybody here in the room Latino is willing to speak on what their thoughts of Latin the term Latinx are?
Stupid.
What do you think?
It is stupid because there's no gender in Latin American languages. So it's masculine and there's no speaking. It is not even whether Muslim they should be on foreigners to speak in Spanish. It's just a lot.
Yeah. Actually, Latin, the language Latin, has a gender neutral, which would actually also sense make sense if you wanted to get Latin high or that would be a word. You could do that. So everybody knew that last week, and translate includes everybody. When I sorry, I say this is the most question. When Neil Armstrong walked on the moon and said, "This is small step for man and one giant leap for mankind," in any of the things we saw in the I never hear people when they say use gender and use language. Instead of using mankind, say humankind. Really? Did anybody think that reference to mankind? Did anybody feel that the word history was his story? Did anyone actually think that? La palabra más viejo que es historia, because of Latin history, historia. That's how I know it's not a gender-based word based on an English pronoun. Like, it's absurd. It got absurd at some point. Anyway, sorry. The Vietnamese who came were actually hyper-conservative. In part, if they had lower language capabilities, what do you do as an immigrant? You start your own business. That way you can avoid having an employer criticize your English. Right? So a lot of Vietnamese became small business entrepreneurs. Small business entrepreneurs are always going to tend toward research. And I'm pointing this out because that's why it's so absurd. The Klan was targeting them and saying, "We're bringing the war home, killing the communists here." These people were all anti-communists. There was a selection bias. Which Vietnamese came from Vietnam? The ones who ate communists. The ones who were actively fighting communists. I'm just trying to make a point here. It was absurd. This was part of a false narrative perpetrated by the Klan. Racist tropes were used against them. You'll hear these, so pay attention whenever you hear something. They carry these seeds, they rape your women, they eat your pets, they're welfare sheets, falsely believe they came with smuggled gold or government money, etc., etc. Those were all made up lies about Vietnamese. They didn't come and go to us. And if it's guidance and compass, but there's giving guys traffic or witnesses at shootings. Mention workmates. They started winning the police for fires against the insurance company, but the Vietnamese had a really big argument in their favor. They were too cheap to buy insurance. So there was no insurance fraud there. Group control exposed to patrols, the Vietnamese Fishermen's Association lawsuit early in the 80s. So it was actually the Vietnamese Fishermen's Association, right? It's going to law. You can't shut down the census, but there were others. So the plan to shut down their paramilitary training camps. And the Mexican Association in Joshi, basically says, "Hey, Klan, well, you can't be here because you can't operate here in Texas." But that doesn't necessarily just make them go away. What you'll find is in the next section we're talking about, that the Klan will essentially break down one group, but then you'll see smaller groups. I see this connecting drug cartels. If you decapitate a drug cartel organization, you'll split into four cartels. And yes, you can say, "Oh, but we need to do the silver cartel." Yeah, now you have to do all these things. Else, it's all the same bad law. You're just operating under the what you need is a comprehensive strategy at the state, federal, and local level. You need a bigger tax base in Mexico to really be able to deal with this. So that you can hit otherwise, they go from moving moving large amounts of drugs, which hasn't been bother the local population. Well, what happens when there's not softness? There's distortion, kidnapping, all kinds of nasty ways to make money that are lower barriers to entry. You want to be a big cartel boss? You need friends out in Colombia that are willing to write you a lot of money. That's expensive. There's trust involved. You have to build the relationship to that. If you're a brand new drug cartel, you might not have that ability or that access. So you got to do lower barriers to entry products. What's the lowest barrier to entry? Walk up to a small local business owner and say, fuck you, give me 10. What are you gonna do? Sorry, you're supposed to be looking at me when I do the fake crowd, right? And in that way, you see a lot of cartels in Mexico are not cartels, right? They're turning into sort of models. Over time, they will capitalize that money, capitalize the, the back of it. Or they might go to oil fields or the water fields, selling really water. They sold from other sources, the owners and the mediums, they don't have. All right, well, why don't we pick up here again on Thursday? The stone was really created. I was just like that. Shoot, how am I living on the year? Somebody quick Google the year of birth of the nation. And it's really scheduled. 1915. 1915. And it's one of the earliest kind of silent films that makes it really big. And it is a homage to the American South and the racist elements of it. It portrays radical Reconstruction as a horrific military occupation by the U.S. military, by the Union Army, and it portrays the Klan as the great liberators in this story. It plays a lot of racial tropes, such as black Union soldiers, harming white women, things like that. So it's this film that leads in part to a resurgence of the Ku Klan. Because as we described before, you have the Klan essentially gets effectively defeated. It's an insurgency. They're not really doing that very well against the Union Army. The Union Army pulls out of the end of radical Reconstruction in 1878, and in effect, the Klan won. This is one of those great examples of you don't have to win militarily to win. Because sometimes struggles are inherently political. Let's give an example. There's a famous Vietnamese general meets with a famous American general at the end of the Vietnam War. And the American general says to the Vietnamese general, you never once defeated us again. And the Vietnamese general looks at him and says, you are completely right. He's also totally irrelevant. Because he basically said, we sapped your country's will to fight. Yeah, your army came and won every single nation in that. You still quit went out. We sapped your political will to fight. We knew the game better than you. We sapped your political will to fight. Vietnam, in many ways, was a bait and lead strategy. If you look at Vietnam, it was during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, it was us against the Soviets. To a certain extent, us against the Chinese, but that kind of started to change in the 1970s with détente. Anybody tell me what détente means? Détente. It's a fancy French word for a cooling of relations. So basically, Nixon meets with Mao Zedong in China and says, hey, stop allying with the Soviets. Don't ally with them. And we'll kind of neutral with you. And there was a cooling of relations with the Chinese. Well, that meant the Chinese were no longer on the Soviet side. And the Soviets were dramatically leaving at that point. Because the Soviets were always the dominant form of power. We spend, in a given year, 3 to 5% of GDP on military defense. Gross domestic product, total size of our economy. In any given year during the Cold War, the Soviets were spending 17% of GDP on military. Okay? So we spend 3%, they're spending 17%. Who spends more? No! Sweden! No! China is bigger! We are bigger! We are better! Russia sucks! We are bigger! We are better! That's just going to choose not to be. So, if you're not going to fight a direct confrontation with the United States, what can you do? You get them bogged down in the insurgency, and then you feed that insurgency. Every so often in Vietnam engagements, there would be aerial engagements that American pilots would fly. These are not Vietnamese pilots. These are Russian pilots. They're too freaking good. These are Russian pilots, we know. Just by the way they're flying, we know these are Russian pilots. It was a bait and bleed strategy. For very little money, they could feed the Vietnamese weaponry, training, whatever. And they could bleed us. Have you ever been to Washington, D.C. and looked at Vietnam Memorial? My mother was a Vietnam vet. I had to go there. There's a lot of freaking names of dead American soldiers. That was a long war for us. We spent a lot of blood and treasure in that war. It was a bait and bleed strategy. They were bleeding us out. For the amount of money they were putting in, they were bleeding us out. This time I just said that. What? 1979? No, not yet. You're getting closer to like 89 and 91. What happened in 1979? Oh, sorry. No, that happened earlier. That was like 73. That was like once we were there. It was either 78 or 79. The Russians, the Soviets, roll into Afghanistan. And it's our turn down there. And so if you ever get a chance, watch Charlie Wilson's War. It's a wonderful movie. This was a real Texas congressman. So what does he do? He meets up with the CIA and he gets secret government funding for Stinger missiles to Mujahideen. Mujahideen were the holy warriors who were fighting the communist atheists and were putting out the call to every Muslim in the world to go and fight the Soviets and providing them Stinger missiles. See, Afghanistan is this mountainous place. Mountain grows, very mountainous. Even if there were to grow, they'd be great places to put an IED. Right? We experience it. Too many choke points, a lot of people on mountains. So, going in for another helicopters. Anybody know what a Stinger missile is? Tell us what a Stinger is. Yeah, so it's a short fire missile. You've lost. You can point with a fire that's the ground, he's going to go to the target. It's a beautiful thing when you want to lead out the Soviets. So what we did is we provided those missiles to the Mujahideen, and they successfully led out the Soviets. The only more impressive bleeding out of the Russians that has occurred, at least that I looked at in the last 100 years, is what we did to them in Europe. And now we're going to negotiate. The most beautiful bleed them out strategy in history. Now we're still going to negotiate. And we're also accepting terms before the negotiation starts. It'll be the most brilliant failure that it'll take you 10 to 20 years. Remember I said it's not 10 to 20 years. When there's a lot more wars of conquest in the world, remember I pointed to this moment. If you give up an inch of Ukrainian territory, you're giving up a fundamental principle. That fundamental principle is you don't just get to invade other countries because you decide to want it. Because you're telling yourself some story about how it was yours, the historical mythical. Otherwise, ton of wars. There are 2,000 nations, ethnic groups that would love to be nations in the world. There's only 180 countries, and most of those don't count. If all 2,000 national identities fighting to redraw all the lines, how long are we going to be at war globally? Forever. You've heard of Afghanistan, you've heard of Pakistan, everybody Baluchistan, Kashmir, well, maybe you'll start hearing about them. Every little group that wants to have a war, we fight war is ending. Beautiful system that we set up. I say we, I said United States of America, post-World War II environment, beautiful system set up. The lines are the lines. Stick up, Buttercup. Yeah, they saw it. Europeans drove straight lines, they didn't pay attention to the rivers, they didn't pay attention to what people's on what side. But you know what? We'll promote human rights and democracy. Either used in whatever country you're in, and we'll minimize the number of wars there are. We lived through 0 world wars between great powers. 0. You think the war in Iraq is bad? You think the war in Afghanistan is bad? Imagine one day of battlefield casualties on a per capita basis on World War II. You don't know that. The entire time we were in Iraq, from 2003 to 2011, 3,000 total American military service casualties. Imagine if 3 battles in World War II on a per capita basis. Remember that? What is it? We were real followers. Followers. Anyway, that's my little rant. Bring it up to modern day, make it relevant to current events. Right now, we're talking about ending our baby lead strategy with the Russians, which is like so sad. It just made me so happy to watch them suck it up. They were terrible. 3 times the size. Oh, they tried to take Kyiv. They were losing in the first days. We should just kept beating them weapons. This is giving us a really important lesson. Sometimes it goes to and you just need manufacturing capacity. There's nothing fancy about making artillery shells. Why aren't we making a shit ton of artillery shells as a country? Why aren't we doing that? Why does North Korea have some kind of advantage on us? Not for military stuff. No one gets the treatment. Not for military stuff. You'll find yourself out of ammunition. We not trying to have that capacity indigenously, globally, domestically. We need to maximize that capacity. And if we maximize and spend that money on the military, we will deter those tactics. We also need to protect specific industries that are defense related. That drone is on its way anymore. That drone is invisible. I can read that drone in invisible. And they're doing it anywhere. And we're adapting. We need to make drones better than the Chinese do. We need those batteries. We need lithium now. We need to find lithium. I was in the gym and I was working out in the oil man. I didn't know. I was just talking about it. What are you doing? It's like, oil is not. I was like, he goes, no. I was like, he's like, I'm trying to figure out now. It's how you get the lithium. See, when you do fracking, you put a bunch of salt water basically down in the ground, and then you pull it back up, and that forces the oil to come up, and you can start that. Well, you know what else comes out besides oil? Salty brine. And in that underground is what we're going to call lithium, which is all your freaking batteries. And we need more of it in this country now. This is long-term national security. So I'm diverting a little bit from Homeland Security, but I see Homeland Security and national security being related. We need to be investing more in battery technology, more in drone technology, more in chips. We cannot depend on Taiwan and China for the production of cheap chips. And don't let anybody tell you that Americans aren't willing to do it. The last 2 years, I heard all these expert stories. The Taiwanese were coming and saying, oh, the Americans are racist. The Americans won't work like that. The Americans won't be able to make chips at the peak level being made by TSMC in Taiwan. Guess what? After the CHIPS Act, we built chip factories. TSMC led those chip factories in Arizona. All American employees besides the top levels. making chips just as good as the Taiwanese. Same people. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. Yeah, they're not going to work 12-hour days. Once we have evenings and 8-hour work days, fine. But if you can't get it done in an 8-hour work day, figure out these schedules. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. All right, sorry for my little rant there. 1979, Klan Street's birth of the nation. This gets the local communists all riled up. I was grew up. It was so funny in my household. So I had an uncle who was really conservative, and my dad was like kind of making fun. They were making fun of him. They were like they called him Uncle Pinko because he was pink. He wasn't red enough to be an actual socialist, right? And then they would call him the uncle. He was kind of racist. So in a sense, they call him Uncle Redneck or Uncle Redneck because he really had to just take the old kind of guy. It's objectively racist. It's an interesting story. The integration was there issues in the United States. He worked in a steel mills in Buffalo, is when they were even, that's it still made steel in large numbers. He was working in steel mills. And they ended all these segregation policies, but what they did was they came in with these judicial remedies. And sometimes the judicial remedies would be like, you have to have this many of this racial group in management positions and things like this. And my uncle was actually, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he basically was forced to give someone else his personal tools and equipment, and he went from a management position based on race to a non-management position. And he was like, this is reverse racism. And he goes, where does he go? Because he went as a joke, but he did it for real. He was telling me about it. He went to the NAACP. The NAACP was founded as a civil rights group. And it was promoting a lot of this legislation. And he goes to Blackboard at the NAACP and he goes, this, and this, here's what's happening. After this remedy was put into place, I was changed to this. This is lowering me. This is racial discrimination. And Blackboard looks at it and goes, you're absolutely right. The NAACP is going to take your case. The remedy is gone too far. And you pull it. My racist uncle went to the NAACP and the NAACP helped him and he won the case. I read that story because people go, well, the NAACP, that's a racist organization. No, it's not. My racist uncle went in there and got help from the NAACP. We're never going to see a backlash against the EI, but there's going to be a backlash, and that backlash is going to go too far. And then there will be a backlash to the backlash. It's going to play out over the next 5 to 10 years. There were bad things about the EI. There were bad things about it. I'm absolutely acknowledge this. The backlash is going to cause problems too, and then there's going to be a backlash to that. And we're all going to learn a whole bunch of lessons over the next 10 years about this. This communist group holds a death to the Klan rally in Greensboro, North Carolina. Now, in provocative fashion, the Klan shows up to this rally. Well, you can imagine, you got these anti-racist communist group holding a death to the Klan rally. That's improved. And then the Klan shows up and it turns into a conflict. It turns into a physical conflict, and 5 people die. So the Klan and the neo-Nazis are charged, but are acquitted by white juries. You're going to read about this in Captain Blue. One of the interesting things that happens is a lot of the white women from the juries ended up dating the Klansmen worth finding the case. They were conflict of interest. So they follow up with them while they're on the stand. Communist Worker Party counter protests and storms civic center. Class vows revenge. Studies pictures of participants for Greensboro. Sorry, I told that story a little out of point. So you have the Klan event, the communists come and disrupt the screening of Birth of a Nation, Klan vows revenge, then the communist group holds an event death of the Klan shows up and turns out. So Kathleen Ballou points to this really interesting trend that happens in the post-Vietnam era, and that is the unification of the Klan and neo-Nazis. I talked about this a little bit in the last lecture. They couldn't stand to be in the same room together because the Klansmen had fought Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. That, when those guys aged out and were no longer the active members, that stopped the ability of the inability of the Klan and the neo-Nazis to come together. Look at them in sort of hindsight as natural allies, but it wasn't until the post-Vietnam era that happened. And so in the 1980s, that trend is becoming less salient. Okay, let's move on to the next lecture.